Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Most enterprise AI programs do not fail in a visible or dramatic way. What typically happens is far more subtle. The pilot succeeds, leadership aligns around the opportunity. The model demonstrates measurable potential. Early momentum creates the impression that transformation is underway. But 12 months later, the initiative remains trapped between experimentation and operationalization. It has neither scaled nor formally failed. What emerges is organizational drift. This presentation examines why that happens and why the underlying issue is rarely technical capability. In most enterprises, the real constraint is institutional design, governance coordination, and operating model readiness. If you find these enterprise AI discussions valuable, you may consider subscribing to my YouTube channel for future deep dives on leadership, transformation, and AI execution. One of the most common strategic misinterpretations in enterprise AI transformation is treating pilot success as proof of organizational readiness. In reality, pilots operate inside highly protected conditions. They benefit from dedicated teams, compressed approvals, curated datasets, and concentrated executive sponsorship. In other words, many of the institutional frictions that normally slow enterprise execution are temporarily removed. So the pilot proves something important, but limited. It proves technical feasibility inside a controlled environment. What it does not prove is that the organization can absorb AI-driven decisions at production scale across regulatory constraints, governance layers, operational workflows, and cross-functional coordination structures. That distinction becomes critical during scaling. Most successful pilots are structurally engineered for success. Dedicated teams are ring-fenced from competing priorities. Governance processes are temporarily accelerated. Data quality is artificially curated. Decision paths are shortened through direct executive access. But each of these conditions disappears during enterprise rollout. As scaling begins, teams inherit competing mandates. Standard governance processes return. Production data introduces fragmentation and inconsistency. Decision-making slows as approvals move through traditional organizational hierarchies. The result is predictable. The same initiative that performed effectively in a protected environment begins to deteriorate under normal enterprise operating conditions. This is why pilot performance and enterprise scalability are fundamentally different capabilities. When the initiative exits the pilot environment, it encounters the full weight of enterprise operating conditions. Legacy architecture that was never designed for AI integration. Fragmented data ownership with no single controlling authority. Risk and compliance controls that introduce mandatory review gates. Regulatory requirements around explainability and audit trails, and cross-functional approval chains where IT, legal, risk, finance, and HR each hold effective veto power. The critical insight here is that the constraint is no longer technical capability. It is institutional coordination, and most organizations discover this only after they have already committed investment and leadership attention to scaling. By the time the enterprise wall becomes visible, significant momentum has already been lost. Coordination complexity is the silent velocity killer in enterprise AI deployment. At stage 1, the pilot team operates at full velocity with a single executive sponsor. Speed is high. Decisions are fast. At stage 2, technology and business unit functions enter the chain. Drag becomes visible. Priorities compete. At stage 3, architecture, compliance, and risk are drawn in. Each function introduces independent review cycles. Deployment velocity compresses significantly. At stage 4, full cross-functional enterprise sign-off is required. The program effectively stalls or exits entirely. The critical insight is that this progression is entirely predictable. Organizations that do not redesign their coordination architecture before scaling will encounter this stall at stage 3 or 4, after significant investment has already been committed and institutional expectations have been set. One of the most important structural problems in enterprise AI transformation is fragmented accountability. Technology teams own infrastructure, business units own workflows, risk and compliance teams own regulatory exposure, data teams manage lineage and governance, executive leadership retains final accountability. But no single function possesses end-to-end operational authority across the entire transformation chain. This creates a governance gap where responsibility is distributed, but decision authority remains fragmented. In practice, fragmented accountability behaves very similarly to absent accountability. And when scaling pressure increases, institutional drift emerges because no single authority structure can resolve cross-functional bottlenecks quickly enough. In BFSI, the institutional friction that affects all enterprise AI programs compounds layer by layer. First, core system data fragmentation. Legacy core banking and insurance platforms were not designed for unified AI data pipelines. Retrofitting them creates structural data lineage problems that pilot environments never encountered. Second, governance escalation latency. Risk committees, model review functions, and compliance cycles introduce institutional latency that is fundamentally incompatible with AI deployment velocity. Third, distributed risk ownership. 3 lines of defense, each with independent review mandates and no single cross-functional authority to accelerate decisions. Fourth, regulatory model governance. SR 11.7, the EU AI Act, and DORA impose explainability and validation requirements that pilot timelines deliberately deferred and that production environments cannot. BFSI AI programs that do not redesign governance infrastructure before scaling will encounter regulatory exposure before they achieve operational scale. Industrialized AI requires much more than model deployment. It requires redesigning the institutional operating system surrounding the model. Decision flows must be accelerated for machine speed environments. Governance must become embedded operational infrastructure rather than a post-deployment control layer. Escalation paths must become traceable and scalable. Role accountability must be explicitly defined before deployment pressure emerges. Operational workflows often require redesign because they were originally optimized for human execution rather than AI-assisted decision systems. This is the transformation layer many enterprises underestimate and frequently postpone. The stall is not a decision, it is a drift. Enterprise AI stagnation follows a predictable 5-stage institutional pattern. The pilot succeeds in a protected environment. Leadership aligns and issues a scale mandate. The initiative encounters enterprise friction and coordination begins to fail. The program enters stagnation, neither scaled nor discontinued, and eventually it drifts, with the organizational assumption that someone else is advancing the agenda. 3 structural root causes drive this pattern consistently. Decision flow rigidity. Approval hierarchies built for human review cadences are incompatible with AI speed cycles, eroding business case value before operationalization. Incentive misalignment. Individual function KPIs penalize the cross-functional coordination that scaling requires, making stagnation the rational institutional outcome. And governance timing failure. Governance designed after deployment creates retroactive friction that stalls operations already in motion. The stall is not a surprise. It is the predictable outcome of an operating model that was never designed for algorithmic velocity. The enterprises that will operationalize AI at scale are not necessarily building the most capable models. They are redesigning governance, operating models, and accountability structures before scaling pressure arrives, not in response to it. Path A represents the organizations that stall. They treat AI as a technology deployment challenge. They defer governance redesign. They operate with distributed accountability and no consolidated decision authority. And they substitute pilot momentum for the institutional mandate that sustainable scaling requires. Path B represents the organizations that scale. They redesign decision flows before deployment. They embed governance as operational infrastructure. They name a cross-functional accountability owner before the first production decision is made. And they build institutional mandate that is independent of executive sponsorship cycles. The pilot was never proof of transformation. It was proof that the institution had not yet been tested. Governance, orchestration, accountability. These are the three pillars of enterprise AI readiness and the competitive moat that will separate the institutions that scale from those that drift. Hope you would have enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.